Okay, we're going to get started. Welcome everyone to another SDEC session. My name is Adam Greco, and I'm part of Search Discovery. And we head up this community of free digital analytics education. For those of you who are maybe on this call and you haven't joined the SDEC, it's totally free and no marketing, no spam. If you want to join the SDEC, I'm going to be putting a link in a second in the chat group that you can join. And once you join, you'll tell us which topics you'd like to get notified about. And then you'll get emails whenever we're doing webinars, and you'll get meeting invites for the topics that you choose. Today's topic is in the tag management area. And we're going to be having Peter Meyer talk about Tealium, which is one of the cool tag management systems out there for those of you who aren't using the free ones provided by the main analytics vendors, Adobe and Google. So before we jump in and have Peter start, just to let you know the housekeeping stuff, he's going to be talking for about 30 minutes, and then we're going to leave 10 to 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. If you have questions during the session for Peter, please use the Zoom Q&A area, because too many times people use the chat, and that makes it a little tricky. So please use the Zoom Q&A area. That's the easiest for us. If you have a technical problem or you have questions about the SDEC, or you're not in the Slack group yet, or you just need help with this things related to SDEC, you could send me a private message in the chat during this session. So that's pretty much it. So Peter, I'm going to hand it off to you, and I'll come back when we're ready for the Q&A. So thanks so much for presenting, and take it away.
Thank you very much. I am very happy to be here to share some knowledge. And yes, I am supposed to talk about Tealium IQ and give you an introduction to concepts and features of the product. I have to add that Tealium IQ is a quite extensive product, I would say, or elaborate, you might say. A lot of stuff is in there. So I have chosen some key things that I believe would give you some overall idea of what's going on and how the product is put together and works. So let's get going with that. So who am I? I am Peter Meyer, and I work as a senior web analytics developer at Nordea in Denmark. Nordea is a bank, actually the biggest financial institution in Northern Europe. And we have customers both personal and companies and stuff like that. And what do I do there? I implement Tealium. I create JavaScript code needed for some of our implementations. I also work with code needed in Adobe Target for A/B testing and loads of other stuff. But the angle, my angle is that it's usually more technical stuff, often needing code in the likes of JavaScript and front-end code. I have previously worked in IH Nordic, if anyone knows that company, an agency in Denmark. And there I have also worked with loads of different products in our area. What I can say is, of course, working at a bank, we have more limited portfolio of products. But I have worked with a lot of different products in the world of mostly web analytics. And that I have done for about 10 years or so, starting with, as I note here, with log file analyzing in web trends. So I have tried to work with the more cumbersome log stuff and not only events and stuff like that. I come further back from a background as a backend developer, C#.NET more precisely, and have worked a lot with the CMS called Sitecore, if anyone knows that. But at the moment now, I'm mostly working with front-end code, connected to analytics and A/B testing and targeting solutions at Nordea. Yes. So, if you know anything about other tag managers, be it Google Tag Manager, Launch, or similar products, and you have wondered a bit about what Tealium does and how it does it, then this should be for you, this session. If you don't have any particular experience with any particular tag manager, then this should be valuable for you as well, because it is more or less basic parts of the product I will go through, so that you, as mentioned earlier, get a kind of overview of how it's put together. So as mentioned a bit earlier, I won't go through everything, but I hope you will get an all-round idea as to what's going on in Tealium and how it's going on. So yeah. So Tealium comes, I want to say out of the box, but you of course need to do some work to make it work. But it comes with modules, SDKs, libraries, plugins, and whatever to make it easy for you to implement it on any of the included platforms. So I mentioned Sidecore. You can see here, for instance, that we have a Sidecore module. If you put that into your Sidecore CMS setup, then that will help you make it easy to, inside of Sidecore, select what kind of data from the CMS you want to include in the data layer per page, for instance. We also have specific SDKs for Angular and React, for instance, for the SPA people. We also have something for WordPress. And then you can also get SDKs for Android, iOS, watchOS, and stuff like that. That makes it easier to implement if you don't necessarily have that much resources for development. But development is of course still needed, because someone needs to put this in, and someone also needs to do some work inside of Tealium, of course. What we usually talk about when we talk web is then this block here, the JavaScript web installation, and that's similar to what you see in Google Tag Manager and Launch. Not that much Launch as Google Tag Manager, but kind of more or less the same idea. And with that comment, I'm jumping directly into an example of an implementation on a generic website. So here I have a mock-up HTML with Tealium put in. What is the key? What's the key here is this part. This script inclusion, that is the normal inclusion of Tealium on a web page, as it's mentioned here, asynchronously. By default, Tealium runs asynchronously on your web pages, but you can, in different ways, get it to run synchronously. So if you, for instance, jumping up here to the top one here, if you, for instance, want to run Adobe Target on your site through Tealium IQ, then you would probably also like to have some sort of anti-page flicker functionality running, so that your pages are not flickering when content is getting replaced by Adobe Target activities. To do that, you can choose, and I'm saying choose because it's optional, you can choose to include this script, which is then running synchronously. And that's actually rather nifty, I would say, because yes, the TMS would then be running asynchronously, but you can have this one file, including the anti-flicker functionality, running synchronously. But this is optional, so if you don't need it, you should, of course, not put it in at all. Because synchronous stuff halts stuff as well, and delays stuff. So only if you need to use stuff like that. What we also have is this thing right here, UTAG data. And that is the JavaScript object containing the on-page data layer, we could call it. So a difference between Tealium and other TMSs is that I would say usually it's called the data layer. This is a data layer, but it's actually called the Universal Data Object, the UDO inside of Tealium. But this is a generic picture of what you usually see when you look at a Tealium implemented site, a Tealium IQ implemented site, that is. Not to go into the scripts or anything, but what I want to mention is that the path of both the synchronous file and the asynchronous one down here always has account mentioned, profile, and prod here. That's what we call the environment in Tealium. I'll get more into that, but just to tell you that you can actually read in the URL which kind of Tealium you're looking at. If it was for development use or development server, it would normally say dev here. That's a larger discussion, but we have some environments I will talk to you about a bit later as well. So, as mentioned, the URLs are the same and they have the same pattern. In this case, it's just the asynchronous file, but both asynchronous and synchronous would be hosted on this CDN host name under UTAG, and then you would have the Tealium account, the Tealium profile, and the Tealium environment mentioned here. Yeah. So let's then look at a glossary of terms. Let's say it's a simple one to compare some of the terms in Tealium, used in Tealium, with those used in Google Tag Manager and Launch. So to start with, we have something called an account in Tealium, and we also have something like that called exactly the same in Google Tag Manager and Launch. What I need to mention is that in Tealium, one company usually has one account they pay for. I'm not saying you can't get more than one, but usually you have one. So where I work in Nordea, it would, for instance, be named Nordea. And then that was where all of our Tealium IQ content would be. But one Tealium IQ user logging in, that could be a consultant, as I'm mentioning in the comment here, that person could also have access to a lot of other accounts. So not to say that you can only see one, but usually one company has one. And then below the account, we have what we call profiles inside of Tealium IQ. And what is that? That is then the same as a container inside of Google Tag Manager and a profile, a property inside of Launch. We also have something called libraries, but let's start with profiles. So the profiles are where you put all the things you want to put on a website or in an app or on a PlayStation using the Tag Manager. So that's where you usually work. But we also have a concept in Tealium called a library. And a library is actually the same as a profile. But what you can do with libraries is that after setting a lot of stuff up in the library, you can actually connect that library to any number of profiles in your setup so that all the content from the library automatically gets added to the profiles when it's updated. A little bit more about that in a minute. Then the next concept we have is tags. We also have something called extensions, but tags are the same as tags in Google Tag Manager and extensions in Launch. And yeah, in Tealium, the tags are, for instance, Google Analytics or Adobe Analytics or Adobe Target for that matter. So it's the scripts we would put directly on the site if we did not have a TMS implemented. Then we have something called extensions, and that is not the same as extensions in Launch. That is, as the word is saying, an extension. So you add or have the possibility to add extra stuff to your setup. That could be, for instance, lowercasing all variables you have in your data layer, or that could be maybe be preparing some data, or maybe fixing some data getting sent in wrong before the tag, for instance, Adobe Analytics run. So it's extra functionality and modifications, but not tags. Whereas in Launch, both tags and extensions would be one extension, I would say, in this regard. So going on, and this is the last glossary page I have here. Variables, the same as variables in Google Tag Manager, and the same as data elements in Launch, more or less, I would say. So these are the variables of data you work with inside of the TMS, path, event values, whatever. But variables inside of Tealium doesn't really exactly work the same as in other TMSs. But I guess that goes for all the TMSs out there, that they have their own special ways of doing some of the things, at least. But mainly it is the same. A little bit more about that later as well. So load rules, that is the rules we have that then trigger, for instance, Google Analytics to register a page view, for instance. That's the same as triggers in Google Tag Manager and rules in Launch. But inside of Tealium IQ, we also have something called conditions, and we have something called scope. I will get into that later, but what you need to know right now is that load rules are then the rules that tell the tags to run on a page, or when an event occurs for that matter. And then, as the last item, I had some blue lines here. Let's skip to the last one here. So lastly, we have the concept data layer, and that is, as a concept, the same as in both Launch and Google Tag Manager. It is the collection of all the variables we can use inside of our implementation and map to tags and use for different purposes. So almost more or less the same. And then to get back to that for a bit, the UDO. That is then, as I mentioned earlier, a data layer, but that's the data layer as it is on the page, the HTML page, or in an app directly. And I'm saying that because it's not the entire portion of variables you could work with inside of the data layer. It is only the variables that are put on the pages, or as I mentioned, in an app directly, to get sent into Tealium IQ. So yeah. So now I want to go a little bit further into some of these mentioned concepts, and starting with profiles and libraries, because that's kind of the buckets we work in. So where are our work areas? Or what are our work areas? So as mentioned, profiles are the container we work in, the bucket we work in, and inside of a profile we have tags, so the scripts we would normally put directly on our pages or in our apps. Google Analytics Adobe Analytics, whatever, tracking pixels for Facebook, whatever. And then we also have these extensions living in the same place. And then we have the data layer. And inside of the data layer, we have the variables. More or less, I would say, like it is in any other TMS I know of, at least. Maybe except for the extensions themselves. But if we then skip to libraries, as I mentioned, libraries are the same as profiles, but they can be inherited by profiles. So in this example, we have profiles for 3 different websites, 1, 2, and 3, and we have 2 libraries. The first one called corporate tracking. That could be the tracking that corporate demands that we have on all our websites. That one is, I can see the color is a bit bad, but that is then included by profile for site 1, 2, and 3. So all of them, these 3 arrows. But it is also possible to have a different library, for instance, as mentioned here, global ad tags, that is only included in one of the profiles. So that means that if I open the profile from website 1, then it would, when I open it, import the latest changes from the libraries it's connected to. In this case, it would be both of these libraries, the tracking one and the ad tag one. But for site 2 and 3, they would only import the changes from corporate tracking because that's the only library connected to that profile. It is quite clever that you can use libraries, I think, but you need to be aware that if you work with libraries, that anything you add to a library that gets imported into the profile can normally not be edited inside of the profile. It gets imported and then it is as it is. So you need to go back to the library and then do any needed changes there, publish your library again, and then get it into the profile again that way. It is possible to for instance, change variables added by a library, but I'm not going to go into that. But as a key pointer, you need to be aware that anything added from a library to a profile cannot be changed inside of the profile. Normally, I have to add. So tags. What about tags? Inside of Tealium, we actually have a lot of tags. And what we have is, I think there's around 1,300 or more different tags. But then argue, do you need that many tags? No, you don't. But just to say that a lot of tags are pre-made so that you don't need to create them yourselves. That is quite nice. And you find the tags through this tag marketplace, as you can see here. That is quite nice. You just search for Google, for instance, and then it shows you a list of any matching tags, and then you just click add, and then it's added to your active profile. What you can do as well, that's actually quite nice, is that you can actually click this button, detect tag from code, then paste in a tiny JavaScript or something like that, and then Tealium will try to detect which tag it is, and then let you take the variables from the script you pasted in, and then get them added automatically to the tag it identifies the script as. I have to add that's not working all the time, so you need to be aware. You might add something and then it gets put into your Tealium profile as a totally different tag. So be aware, of course. You also have access to generic tags. So if a tag you need to use are not there, you have access to stuff like pixel tracking tags where you only add some URLs to pixels. You have some iframe and script generic tags as well. So usually it is possible to add tags either using pre-made tags or the pre-made generic tags at least. One thing I need to note regarding tags as well is that in my experience, it is not always the case that if you add a tag, you have the newest version. You might also, for instance, see the newest version at the vendor's site directly, but then see an older version inside of the Tealium IQ tag marketplace. So it's not always updated very fast automatically, and you might need to take a hold of Tealium support to ask them to provide you a newer version inside of Tealium IQ. Just so you know. So an example tag would look like this. Here we have 3 tabs, as you can see: tag configuration, load rules, and data mappings. The first one active here is including the title of the tag, what's it called inside of the Tealium IQ property, but also the most commonly used parameters for that tag or script. In this case, Google Analytics, where we have a tracking ID and a tracker name, for instance. A nice thing as well is that in several of the tags, you can comma separate a list of values. So here in tracking ID, you could, for instance, write 2 different IDs for Google Analytics properties, and then everything getting cached by this Google Analytics tag would get sent to both of those Google Analytics properties. So next tab, load rules, is what it is. That's then the load rules defined to load this tag whenever needed. Data mappings, that is then where you map your variables. So you need to map your data layer variables to parameters or variables of the tag itself here. And that is done for all tags. You would normally have these 3 tabs to work your way through. Yeah. So the data layer and the variables. The UDO I showed you earlier was quite empty. This is an example from, I think, the Tealium learning community. Here you can see a nice example of the structure. So it is actually a JSON object, but it's a very flat one. I myself like to be able to have more than one level in a JSON object put into data layers. But in Tealium, it's very flat. So you have the normal key value pairs. But for instance, down here, if you want to do some e-commerce tracking, you need to do several separate arrays. So here we have a list of 2 products in the product ID variable. Then in the product name variable, we need to have the same amount of values to match all the way down. So category 2, product quantity also 2 ones to defined, and then 2 prices as well. Personally, I would have preferred to, for instance, like in Google Tag Manager, have that in an object itself for each product. Yeah, but that's kind of the deal. You can maybe do something yourself if you want to, but you have some recommended variables to use from Tealium side that then makes it easier to, for instance, work with e-commerce. So they have some certain variables they recommend you to use, because if you use those, then Tealium knows, oh, now I have a product view, And now I can actually automatically, for instance, tell Google Analytics to register that. Yeah, that's how it is. So this is an example of the data layer when the page loads. You have built-in functionality to add new data to the data layer. For instance, at the click of a button, or when someone scrolls on a page, or a virtual page view happens, then you can use included functionality, JavaScript functionality. For instance, this one, UTag link, usually used for triggering events, and then UTag view, used for triggering virtual page views and normal page views, usually. So we have nice JavaScript functionality for that as well, that you can use in your own JavaScripts to push data inside of Tealium using the data layer. So the UDO, Universal Data Object, the data layer on the page itself, or used inside code to convey data to Tealium IQ. So to have a look at the data layer inside of Tealium, we have something like this. This is maybe confusing, but you can see from the start, we have data from the DOM, for instance, the domain or the URL. You could have stuff like the document title, for instance. We have query string stuff. We have metadata, so meta tags included in HTML pages. Then we have cookie values, so you can read cookies directly in the variables. And then you can directly refer to JS, JavaScript variables, for instance, screen.width, or the lowest one here, Meyer, one I made myself. But then you also have, as you of course know already now, the UDO data. And the UDO data would then be stuff like this. So you name some data and you put it in the data layer, and then it gets in on the same level as all the other things mentioned here. Just a lot of grabbed examples, so not to go into the single values here. So these variables inside of Tealium can be of a limited kind of types, and these are the types. So the UDO variable one would be directly, as I guess you might have guessed, the ones coming from the on-page data layer on a website, for instance. But you can actually also add data to them. So if you, for instance, have, let's say I create my own scroll tracker in JavaScript, then I would actually usually add UDO variables to the data layer when someone, for instance, scrolls to 25%, as an example. But we also have, as you saw in the other tabs, query string parameter, first-party cookies, JavaScript variables, directly referencing variables in JavaScript, metadata elements, and then you have the last type called audience stream attributes. I won't go into that one, but that is then variables getting sent to Tealium IQ from Tealium's CDP, Customer Data Platform. So they have this separate product called Audience Stream, which is their CDP product. Quite a nice product, but these variables would then only come from there if you have that product, of course. A thing that I find nice about Tealium IQ is as well that you can actually bulk import variables from CSV. So you can actually, if you have to create, for instance, a lot of Tealium properties manually, but have a lot of the same variables included, then you can actually paste in a specifically formatted CSV file to get variables created inside of Tealium IQ properties automatically. That is quite nice. So you know that. Inside of Tealium, We also have bundles of variables you can add. So that is predefined packages of variables. In this case, it's selected. I have selected Tealium built-in data. As you can see down here, we have, in this case, 3 variables. The lowest one here, session count from UTag. Okay, that is actually adding a variable named this. You can see here in the purple writing, including the session count of the current user. And that is then actually data registered by Tealium itself. But if you add this package, then it will add several of these built-in data points as variables in your properties. We, for instance, also have the other ones here. Is this start of a session? So is this the first page view in a session? And session page view count in the current session. You also have stuff like, for instance, e-commerce variables. I mentioned that Tealium IQ has some recommendations to how you track certain things. And you have a package for e-commerce variables that adds the ones Tealium recommend, then gives you an easy way to map those in your tags, for instance. We also have what Tealium calls provider bundles, and then that is actually the bundles in Tealium IQ that matches the some of the plugins or libraries I mentioned earlier. So in this case, we have a bundle of WordPress variables commonly used in WordPress. If you add this bundle, then the variables gets there, but you then need to install this plugin provided by Tealium inside of your WordPress setup to automatically populate the values in there as well. Quite a long way. This is a very nice thing to be able to use, I would say, because using the standard bundles of variables in Tealium actually also makes it easier to, for instance, use the same e-commerce tracking across different analytics vendors, for instance. Yeah. So jumping to load rules. When will our tags fire? Not a lot to say about this, I would think, but you name your load rules, and then what you can do is that this is variables. You select a variable you have available in the data layer. You select, for instance, contains. You could also have an equals. It could be defined. We have different options to choose here to match the values. And then you add the value that it's supposed to add. In this case, it's very strange example, but path needs to contain the word support, and the hash needs to contain the word section 2. Or query string needs to contain support equals true. So you can have different sections of rules, and then have or something else, or something else, or something else. So and, as you can see here, are supported, or are supported. Quite nice, I think. But another a little bit special thing you can do as well is that you can actually add date range conditions. So a load rule could actually only fire at a specific time, at a specific date, or between specific dates and times, if you want to use that. I have to add, I have not used that a lot myself, but it's a nice feature. Yeah. One thing I might need to add is that if you do this directly, saying some variable contains, then you might actually generate hidden JavaScript errors because that's maybe a bit advanced here, but if you use a contains, it's not checking that the variable is actually there. So if this variable is not there, and we check that it contains this word, then it will actually generate some hidden JavaScript errors. So in cases where you're not sure that a variable is there when the load rule is running at all, meaning that it can be empty, but if it's not there at all, then you need to do entries above the contains ones that says path name is defined. That's rather annoying, I would say, but there's some quirks in some of these load rule options.
Hey, Peter, this is Adam. We are running out of time. So is there
Oh,
anything critical? Because we're 10 minutes over and we got to get to questions. So is there any other critical things before we jump into questions?
sorry about that. Yeah, I had quite a lot, to be honest, but apparently I talk slow today. Sorry about that. I would say that's up to you. I can do questions now, or I can continue.
Yeah, why don't we do questions and then we'll see if there's something critical, we could always do a follow-up session. So I just want to make sure people who ask questions are able to get answers. So the first question we have is, are there timing issues with Tealium? And someone is asking about timing issues between Tealium and Adobe Target integration. Again, if you're not aware, if you don't know the answers, we can just skip to the next one. But have you had any experience with that?
Yeah, actually, I do. I would say that it very much depends on how you implement Adobe Target. As I mentioned, this anti-flicker functionality is quite nice in Tealium, but you need to make sure that your tags are ordered. So if you, for instance, also use the ID service from the Experience Cloud ID service from Adobe, and you use Adobe Analytics, then you need to be dead certain that your setup has the ID service first, then target, and then analytics afterwards. And if you mix those around, then you might get issues with missing IDs and stuff like that. So you need to be aware initially, but I would say if you do what both Tealium and Adobe recommends in that regard, then you shouldn't have any issues. I would say that I haven't had a lot of
Okay.
issues in regards to timings.
Okay. Next one, can we set dependencies on tag with another tag? Can we set a sequence of firing for multiple tags?
Yeah, I haven't gotten to that, but you actually have an order everything loads in, and you can sort things around inside there. But you cannot directly say Google and Analytics inside of the Google Analytics tag needs to run after Adobe Target, for instance, or stuff like that. You have an order things run in, and you could say if you run asynchronously, then you might run into issues.
Okay. And someone had asked if we could share the deck. So Peter, if you want to send me the latest, if anything's changed, I can share for the additional content that people didn't get to see.
Of course.
Um, the next one is there any framework or tag available for React apps?
Yes. Yes. In the beginning where I showed the blocks with plugins and SDKs and stuff for platforms and CMSs and the likes, we had a block with React. So there is I don't know if that's a library or an SDK, but there is something you can start with using in React and Angular for that matter.
Okay. Is there any reporting available on which tags are live or expired, assuming there is an auto expiration for marketing pixels?
Yeah, you can see, I don't have any slides for that, but you can see what is active currently or not.
The next question was, where do we activate or implement the consent management feature of Tealium IQ?
I haven't worked with that myself. I know it's there. I know you need to use extensions, which I did not cover yet. But you have functionality in extensions, and then you have built-in functionality also coupled to all of the tags. So Tealium should be, if you use their consent management, be quite okay at disabling tags and stuff based on the
Okay.
permissions given.
Next question is, how can you create the Tealium IQ equivalent of a custom JavaScript variable in Google Tag Manager?
Not sure I understand.
I think they're saying if you do custom JavaScript, basically if you use custom JavaScript in GTM to set a variable, is there something similar in Tealium IQ?
Oh, yeah. I think if I understand it correctly, that you can, for instance, in your own JavaScript, call that functionality I mentioned earlier called utag link. That is directly a JavaScript method you can call. And inside of that, you include a JSON variable with the variables you want to add. Then you can get your data in whenever you want to based on your own scripts.
Okay. Next question is there first-party enablement available with Tealium IQ? Is it CNAME based?
It is not, but it can be. You can get Tealium to set up the CDNs with your own CNAME records. You can do that.
Okay. Is it possible to preview changes in Tealium IQ similar to the Google Tag Manager preview mode?
Yes, and I did not get to that, sadly. You have environments, and you usually, or you have the basic ones, dev, QA, and prod, and you publish to each of those. So you could publish your changes to dev, as you usually should, and then on a website say, now I want to see dev from Tealium, or you can have a site directly running the dev branch of the Tealium property you have active.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Okay, well, I'm going to stop it there. If anyone has any other questions, I don't know if Peter, if you have maybe your last slide, maybe with your contact info, then people will know if they have any questions, maybe to email you. If you want to pull up that last slide before I end the recording, that way people can pause the recording and see
Yep.
how to contact you. But thank you everyone for joining. And Peter, thank you so much for sharing information on Tealium IQ. I will post the slides in the SDEC Slack group. So again, if anyone needs help getting into the SDEC Slack group, just email us at sdec@searchdiscovery.com. And that's where you can find the slides and the recording of this session. So thank you so much. And for those of you who weren't on our last session, Happy New Year. And we'll see you at our next SDEC session. Thanks again, Peter.
Thank you. Sorry for going over time.
No worries.